nursing, students consulting, and I run a pull-in program where kids come to visit with me for 1 day a month over the course of the year. And so that 1 day has to be pretty amazing. So Dabrowski has been a big part of that 1 day for me and those kids. So for some, I'm going to stick to the script because if I don't, I'll get off on a tangent and then I'll miss all the things that it took me 8 months to put together here, and I already edited 10 pages out. So this was a long process. But before I start, I really feel compelled to tell you why I'm actually not qualified to do this presentation. Because I'm not a psychologist, and I fumbled through Dabrowski and looking for pieces that that resonate with me, and I draw my courage from this when I'm here. So my daughter Elena is 15 years old, and we took a drawing class together this spring, and these are our 2-minute drawings. We were drawing the same thing from a different side, and in 2 minutes I drew that and she drew this, and the instructor was going around the class saying, "So, tell us what you see in Elena's picture," and it was mostly other teenagers and one other old folk like me, and all the teenagers were really quiet and didn't want to say anything. So he came to me and said, "Mom, what do you see in your daughter's drawing?" And I stepped back and I looked at it and I said, I'm trying to draw the object, and she's capturing the light."
Yeah.
And it was really transformative for me because it really brought home how differently she sees things sometimes than I do. It was a really important lesson. So I'm going to tell you the lenses through which I see Dabrowski. First, a mother that is a work in progress, according to my daughters. I'm doing the best I can, but they're training me as quickly as they can as well. I'm a teacher. I wonder if there's any career that is more humbling than this, especially in a world where education is seen as a vehicle for change. I'm a songwriter. Songs have literally saved my life through allowing me to obtain a different orientation with myself with respect to understanding the quandaries I repeatedly find myself in, and some direction as I move forward. And one other thing is I'm a survivor. One EMDR practitioner a number of years ago told me that most women don't live through the domestic situation I found myself in during my early 20s. It was a major catalyst for change in my life, and I have felt to my core the intense guilt and shame that have dogged me through my life, and I've been somewhat buoyed by Dabrowski's descriptions of these things as dynamisms. and as well the empathy that it has fostered in me. Brene Brown says in her work, empathy is what you get when you open your eyes when you're face down on the arena floor. And I opened my eyes, and it opened my eyes. So when I first entertained the idea of the Dabrowskian curriculum, or curriculum for positive disintegration, I encountered some resistance, which intuitively pulled me further into the question that I was asking. The survivor in me doesn't want to leave anyone behind. The teacher in me believes in the calling, and the songwriter is always on the lookout for new material. So to proceed with the inquiry, I knew I would have to do a few things. I think the reason when I said there's got to be a curriculum for this, I think people have a different understanding of curriculum than I do. So I have to define that for you and find evidence of that curriculum that I see in Dabrowski's work. Second, I wanted to introduce this curriculum to students, share the observation, give you some final thoughts, and then have everybody give me feedback and just tell me what I'm missing, because I know I'm missing a whole bunch. So the first thing I did, because Bill Tillier said last time, you got to go back to the original works, this Congress I was at. So these are the works that I read through. I had a bit of a break, disintegration halfway through the top one. And then I just read the last little bits of this one when we were looking at, when I was trying to get a better understanding of the Little Prince, and I won't say his name right, Antoine Saint-Exupéry. Yeah. So, and there's a beautiful piece in in there about him. So, the curriculum. Now I gotta get back to my notes. So let me start with defining what I mean by curriculum, which was at the heart of my 2002 master's thesis in teaching curriculum and learning. For many of my colleagues, if I ask them what the curriculum is, the response would be the program of studies, isn't it? After all, the director of curriculum at the school board office is the one who delivers the program of studies to us, along with all the in-service we require to implement it. These documents have a definition, or reflect a definition that might go a little bit like this. So at first blush, I'm not going to, if you want me to read these out, tell me, but I kind of trust that you're going to read them, so I think that's okay. At first blush, this might seem like not such a bad definition. But then think of some of the exemplars out there of what adults should be, and you might begin to understand why I found it problematic. My exploration of the curriculum and of the tension in the pedagogical relationship came out in a series of songs. So I will share with you what I speak of when I use the word curriculum with the final verse from my song, The River, which was the song that was my literature review in my thesis.
I think you should read it.
You think I should read it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's as young as the last rainstorm, as old as life itself, and it goes twisting through the landscape with a story to tell. And we hate it when it floods, we fear it will run dry. When something happens to the river, something happens to our lives. Songwriters are a pain in the ass, aren't they? They want you to do all the work. The reason my definition uses a river as a metaphor is because I could not separate the curriculum from the ecological piece of being in the world. To speak of it without connecting it to the natural world felt like a death sentence to me, and therefore the metaphor was absolutely essential and continues to underscore the urgent imperative I see in my work as an educator. But to highlight yet another urgent imperative, let's take out the metaphor and the ecological references and the way my brain needs to the structure of a song to sort things out and see what we get. This quote from Hannah Arendt, I believe, will help. Education is a point at which we decide whether we love the world enough to assume responsibility for it, and by the same token save it from the ruin which, except for renewal, except for the coming of the new and young, would be inevitable. And this really guided me through that process. We love our children enough not to expel them from our world and leave them to their own devices, nor strike from their hands their chance of undertaking something new. Prepare them in advance for the task of renewing the common world. So where does Dabrowski fit into this kind of a definition? I think he helps us find the bedrock of this river and identify the properties of the water cycle, describing how they work together to form the complex relationships that emerge. It's in this work as our definition of personality indicates we seek to give possibly an all-inclusive conception of personality and at the same time free it from mutable and consequently non-essential qualities. We endeavor to base our conception on standards and on human values of lasting character, on values accepted and realized by man since the very beginning of his culture, on values as absolute. Mutable and consequently non-essential, the unpredictability of the rain, lasting character, the river. The amazing thing is that Dabrowski goes on to name what some of these absolute values are. He writes this: personality is to a great extent a pliable set of traits sensitive to evolutional crises and environmental reactions. And then he creates a list of traits with extensive explanations. Truthfulness, honesty, courage, love, reverence, humility. On page 25 of his book, Personality Shaping Positive Disintegration, he writes this: the best religious attitude as far as the shaping of personality is concerned is one that draws knowledge from many sources, Such an attitude protects one against a unilateral, formalistic, and dogmatic attitude characterized often by intolerance and a lack of love. Finally, it guards one against an excessive dissipation of one's mental energy into pseudo-asceticism and superficial social work. I want to tell you about another amazing psychologist, and his name is Dr. Dan Popov. He's a scholar of the world's sacred traditions, co-founder of the Virtues Project, and executive director of Wellspring International Education Foundation. He himself is a clinical pediatric psychologist, a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. He has taught at several universities and consulted to government and industry. He was a senior scientist consulting on information systems to NASA and development of Paradigm, one of the first artificial intelligence-based organizational assessment tools. He has traveled the world speaking on the power of the virtues to transform individuals and communities. Together with his wife, social worker Linda Kaplan-Popov, and the Disney Imagineer John Kaplan, they have added a few other viable traits to Dabrowski's list. They are the authors of the Virtues Project, a program that I've been incorporating in my practice since 2001, when I was first introduced to it by my sister, singing partner, mentor, social worker, and Virtues facilitator. She's right here. So I just want to show you the connections I found between the Virtues Project and Dabrowski. And virtues versus values is a significant difference. Virtues are not above values. We can value some of them more than others, but the virtues themselves stand alone. That's my understanding. Oh, there you go. So, my husband put this onto the stick for me. It was in the slide. So I apologize if there's some stuff I didn't have the time to check it. So anyway, Dabrowski on the left, Virtues Project on the right. Man's instinct for development, which in the broadest meaning of the word is a tendency to mental and moral perfection, sooner or later gains power and reinvigorates and enhances the positive values. The Virtue Project says at the heart of all spiritual traditions are virtues described as the essence of human spirit and the content of our character. Dabrowski goes on to say these values, sustained, consolidated, and developed by traditional legal order and customary standards, may undergo jolts and perturbations, may be driven back to the level of potentiality, but can never be eradicated. The Virtues Project presumes that children are born in potential, and we as nurturing adults must seek ways to help them find and own those virtues that they already possess. As they constitute the foundation prerequisite of cultural and moral existence of humanities, these values are indestructible. They have existed from the beginning of man's history and are unchangeable in their essence, though revealing various degrees of development and richness. The Virtues Project is not affiliated with any particular faith, but draws its research from all sacred traditions, including the oral traditions of First Nations. Even in the periods of collapse, they survive in us in the form of readiness and moral yearning for their revival and full realization. The Virtues Project began with an idea that all children are born with virtues and potential, and that when parents and educators awaken these gifts of character, we can change the world. So the Virtues Project has developed 5 strategies. Speak the language of the virtues, recognize teachable moments, set clear boundaries, honor the spirit, and offer companioning. These are the ways to awaken these in others. What does Dabrowski say about this? That's where I really start to get some of the... I'll start here. Let's start with speaking the language of the virtues. If there's any place to illustrate the difference in my conceptualization of the curriculum and what I perceive to be a common understanding, the first strategy is it. When you speak the language of the virtues, you must be committed to understanding what the virtues are and seeing them as they emerge in your students, which differs significantly from teaching them as discrete concepts. To say, this week is kindness week and we're going to focus on kindness. It needs to come alive in our interactions as part of our regular conversation. I can see in your frustration that you are struggling with kindness. What other virtue could help you right now? Teaching the virtues must be more than a vocabulary exercise, and differentiation is essential. In a 1977 interview, Dabrowski was very clear on this point. You should introduce with your strength and your attitude toward the hierarchy of values. Never. You should know and observe him. You should know him little by little through your knowledge of this child. Introduce him by example, by personal experience, little by little, his own hierarchy of values, which could be in agreement with general form of human values. In focusing on kindness, will we see the virtue of justice in the child who is struggling with kindness? For example, how can I be kind to the person who, this morning in the boot room? It requires constant vigilance to recognize virtue in some of the most difficult of circumstances. But it is this kind of vigilance that allows for the teachable moments and the honoring of the spirit. If we overlook justice in favor of what appears to be a lack of kindness, we lose the opportunity for the individual to feel our esteem for the virtue that they are practicing. Dabrowski knew the importance of this. Our capability of experiencing feelings of veneration and esteem are one of the fundamental criteria of the development of personality. Without the feeling of a hierarchy of values above us and without an emotional attitude of esteem for these values, there would be no yearning for an ideal and consequently no action of dynamisms permitting the discrimination of various levels within our individual or inner environment. The second strategy is about teachable moments. And again, this is key. I have seen some excellence mistaken for arrogance when a student had yet to understand humility. I have seen commitment mistaken for lack of maturity when a student was still struggling with detachment. I have seen the power of acknowledging enthusiasm when it appeared they were not listening or caring, allow a child to embrace purposefulness. And the power of acknowledging excellence when they were being bossy, allow a child to embrace flexibility. When you call upon the virtues in those teachable moments, you are no longer imposing a set of rules with a propensity towards shaming, which have no lasting impact. The influence of the environment on a child often possesses the character of disintegrating action, bringing the child to shame, prompting him in a feeling of guilt, or showing anxiety with respect to his behavior. However, this influence does not penetrate deeply into the mind of the child, because he quickly realizes that it is only verbal action, the essence of which is usually only partly experienced by parents and tutors. The third strategy, which is the practice of setting clear boundaries, has transformed my classroom. The virtues we call on for setting boundaries may need to change depending on what we're doing in the classroom that day, but I cannot emphasize the degree to which asking for the virtues we need on a particular day allows them to appear. When the boundaries have not been observed, noting, I see you're struggling with these virtues right now, how can I help? Transforms my role as teaching completely. And I have often said, I am struggling with this virtue right now. How can you help me? And they are always helpful. With this comes the acknowledgement that we all often fall short. It also demonstrates that we know and trust that they are in possession of that virtue. The ideal of personality, the feeling of its place in the individual structure, is therefore very often a source of feeling of inferiority in the developing personality, and particularly in the periods of the slackening of one's moral behavior and dissatisfaction with oneself, in the periods of descendance to a lower level in relation to already attained achievements. An individual moving on the road to development feels a sense of betrayal of himself and contradicting the value which has already been acquired. So when you talk to them of their virtues and ask them to practice, you're acknowledging that they have them already. In Personality Shaping Through Positive Disintegration, Dabrowski articulates the main difference between a positive and negative integration as a feeling of inferiority in relation to the environment, which would be considered positive, versus the feeling of inferiority in relationship to the external environment. When we honor the spirit and offer companioning as opposed to shaming and leading, I believe we can move that external locus of control into the internal realm of the inner milieu. So, anyway, I'll read this. Progressive self-cognizance realized by means of the subject-object in one's self-dynamism permits one to utilize this cognizance in a more purposeful, more effective, and accelerated shaping of personality in oneself and facilitates the work of other developmental dynamisms. I missed a page, but I'm just going to keep going with it. Without the feeling of inferiority, no process of positive disintegration can take place. There's no possibility for the effective realization of the personality ideal. There's no possibility for attaining increasing higher levels of this ideal. When a child knows that they have those virtues in them and you ask them for them, they want to give them to you. I cannot tell you how often I've seen that. So the last strategy, the spiritual companion in Dabrowski, and this comes out of Dabrowski's piece on authentic education. Spiritual companion is a final strategy, requires deep listening. It's most effective when we don't have an agenda. It's meant to support and empower, not fix or rescue. Primarily consists of silence and open-ended questions. Requires trust in the other's process. Now look at Dabrowski. The authentic is this combination of an appreciation of personal dignity towards others with the same attitude towards ourselves, which in turn transfers these attitudes to the group. The authentic is that which expresses the need to treat ourselves both as subjects and objects, and to treat others primarily as subjects. Sensitive, reflective beings who aspire to higher levels of values, who suffer in the present from internal and external conflicts, and who have their own individual aspirations, problems, abilities, and experiences. I don't know, when I'm reading this, they just align. And when you see it like this, it looks pretty simple. So why is this so hard? I recently had the chance to attend a Truth and Reconciliation gathering in my community. I was overwhelmed by the suffering that was incurred by the residential school system. As expected, the talk turned towards the question, what do we do now? And inevitably, the answer was located in the education of our children, and I heard that this morning as well. Conspicuously absent from the gathering were other educators, and this did not surprise me because in education, we truly believe that we are making a difference. Our mantra is, every child succeeds, and above our doorways, we boast that we are an inclusive school and a caring and sharing community that embraces everyone. I want to make it clear right here that I do not dispute that our schools rigorously work towards this vision through a vast variety of strategies and programming. So what's missing? 7 years ago, the Gifted program and the FNMI program, which is our First Nation Métis Inuit program, were simultaneously introduced to our district. We worked together through those first years of tenuous development and growth as we tried to educate our district to the necessity of our programs. What became clear to me during that time is that most of our leaders and many of our teachers do not see schools for the violent places they are. To everyone, they're violent, but especially to our Aboriginal students, FNMI students, and our special needs students. There are highly sensitive individuals in this room who have had to numb and even amputate parts of themselves to work in institutions will understand some of that violence that I speak of. It is inherent in a system that responds well to those who are able to fit in. But there is another kind of violence that I speak of. It is the violence incurred when we turn away from the suffering and conflict. It has been the source of much disquietude for me and is reflected in the works of Dr. David Jardine. He's recently retired professor of mine at the University of Calgary. It was in his extensive writings, which focus on education, Buddhism, ecology, and hermeneutics, that I found other connections that I needed. So I want to put Dabrowski and Jardine side by side now for a minute. So David's on this side. Dabrowski, I'm sorry, that switched around. Sadness, drama, tragedy. This is Dabrowski in Authentic Education. Sadness, drama, and tragedy are intimate aspects of human fate and experience, and it therefore becomes necessary that individuals receive appropriate preparation for this side of life through a proper shaping of the reflective mechanism through which they view these experiences. This is particularly important if proper cultural development is to occur. Jardine writes, there is a joy to be had in the practice of turning towards suffering and letting it be what it is. It is not had in the reveling in the pain of others or wallowing in their or one's own endurances. It is had because this practice, properly practiced, can change the nature of that suffering and their relation to it. Here's where the violence occurs. When in our compassion, in our caring and sharing communities, we attempt to alleviate, cure, help fix, soothe the hurt, deny the importance of the suffering as a place to find beauty and strength. We're full of shortcuts, strategies, behavior plans, classroom rules, expected behaviors, all designed to make our journey through school and eventually life easy. And in that way, we avoid the suffering and the essential practice of changing its nature. Dabrowski called it positive disintegration as a way to keep from pathologizing that suffering. As teachers, we are pulled in so many directions, and we're given so many things that we should try, so many things we should do, the in-service, the PD, all designed to make a difference in the lives of students until everything seems connected, everything's rapidly full, everything starts to beckon and summon, it expands, I expand, I get caught up in the onrush that seems impossible to stop, and I literally fall apart. I don't know where to start. When I read Dabrowski and I see how complex it is, I didn't know where to start. Someday I'll tell David how reading his article in Praise of Radiant Beings was pivotal for me as I worked my way through Dabrowski's and the Virtue Project, and the overwhelming meaning I find in everything that leaves me feeling ridiculously inadequate. In his drawing together, again, of the Buddhism, ecology, hermeneutics, into an understanding of the nature of learning and the role of suffering, I can see the significance of the simplicity of how the Virtues Project works in providing a Dabrowskian curriculum. The simple act of vigilance in the moment to find in every interaction with my students and colleagues the virtue or virtues that are at that moment guiding them changes not only the interaction, but how I view it. Jardine's quote from Hans Georg Gadamer describes it perfectly. I'm thinking of virtues in my mind as I'm reading this. It brings radiance to it, knowing that right now we are at the center of this radiance. It attracts longing of love to it. The beauty disposes people to its in its favor immediately. The beautiful has its own radiance. It is the beauty of that one word and finding that one virtue in a child who has forgotten that they possess it. Not only does it change how they feel about themselves, it changes how I feel about them. In Jardine's article, he speaks of the power of a single word. Every word has an inner dimension of multiplication. Every word breaks forth as if from a center and is related to a whole, through which alone it is a word. Every word causes the whole of the language to which it belongs to resonate and the whole worldview that underlies it to appear. Thus, every word, as the event of the moment, carries with it the unsaid to which it is related by responding and summoning. Suddenly these words just seem so much more powerful to me, especially when Dabrowski and Dan talk about the history of these words or these virtues that have been with us for centuries, generations, through all our sacred traditions. If you look back at this list in the history, you can begin to imagine lineage and evolution. In a few moments, I will demonstrate to you the power that summoning them has had on my teaching practice, and the very act of committing oneself to this vigilance changes you. The Virtues Project itself tells us to be gentle with ourselves as we learn to speak the language of the virtues, and to know we cannot promote their growth in others without growing it in ourselves. I'm going to turn to another passage by David and contrast it with Dabrowski. So David's is on the left. Buddhist tradition is rife with the idea of finding a teacher, finding the right teacher. The right teacher is not simply a property of that person, but a property of the relationship that is given rise by a teacher and student alike. Rightness is then about what a student needs, and not just what they think they need, but also rightness is about what the teacher needs as well, and not just what they think they need, what they had planned, what they hoped. When it works, each saves the other from themselves. Dabrowski writes, awareness of one's imperfection, anxiety with respect to oneself, longing for an ideal, accompanied by a perception that one must work upon his own remolding, should go hand in hand with the work of raising the levels of society. So what does Dabrowski have to say to teachers? We should elaborate a complete system of education which would be contained a program of individual development, utilizing all positive elements of disintegration for the development of the individual and his creativity, while at the same time introducing prophylactic forces against negative disintegration and psychosis. This is what I say to teachers. That's a pretty big statement, but I think it's a curriculum statement. So, I searched for his work saying, okay, how do I do this? I knew I had the virtues, I was already working with them, but I thought certainly he doesn't just write a statement like that and not have some direction. So I emailed Paul and said, Paul, where do I find this? And this is what Paul writes back. Dr. Dabrowski's writing a theory. A theory is vague and self-defining by nature. What you are running headlong into, Susan, is the many points where his theory has to be tested. So I'm just going to dive in. Here is my work in supplying Dabrowskian prophylactic forces. I love that story. To my students through engaging in the 5 strategies of the Virtues Project. It is important to note at the beginning of each year, I share with them the tenets of the Virtue Project and the underlying belief that I have that they each have all the virtues within them at various stages of development. I use the book, The Little Prince, as the vehicle with which to engage with the Dabrowskian curriculum. So, I told you a little bit, these are my kids. So it was 58, and again, groups of 4 to 10, and they came in once a month over the course of the year, and we started our day reading an excerpt from The Little Prince, and then went on to do some creative problem-solving challenges, and math challenges, and art retreats. And so I'm going to give you some insight into our conversations. So this is what I found in that final article. This is what, I'll just call him Antoine. Is that okay? I know it seems familiar. Antoine, let's send Okay, yeah. I had trouble persuading my publishers that a story could end with the Little Prince's death. They believe no story for children should end that way. I disagree with them. Children accept all natural things and adjust without harmful disturbances. The adults are the one who gives them the wrong attitudes, who distort their notions of the natural. So that's a book for us. I was told it was Dabrowski's favorite, so I thought, well, why don't I just use this? So, this is their favorite page in the book, right? So how many of you have read The Little Prince? All right, so I'm sorry if I'll try and explain as we go as much as I can, but their favorite part in the book is when the pilot is talking about his drawing of the elephants inside the boa, and everybody thinks it's a hat. And we had an absolutely wonderful discussion, because by the time we reached this page, they were hooked, and they had many stories to tell about being misunderstood by grown-ups. Wonderful. they love this. By the time we got to this page, they were ready to explore the Little Princess planet in their own. So the Little Princess asked the pilot to draw a sheep for him, and he tries 3 times. And finally he said, "There's a crate, the sheep you want is inside." So it's funny, one of my grade 8 boys, I was at his school, and he runs up, he goes, "Susan, somebody asked me to draw them a dog, and I drew them a crate." He was just so pleased with us. So there's a certain point where I asked, they show a picture in a book of the Little Princess planet, and there's 3 volcanoes and some baobab shoots trying to come up, and his flower with the thorns. And so I said, "Well, that's the Little Princess planet. What does your planet look like?" So I got a few drawings. So I just wanted to show you. This is a grade 4, unbelievably bright, on the autism spectrum little girl, and she said, "I live on a spiral planet." There's this little guy. His asteroid has engines and rockets and a portal to Minecraft and a TARDIS machine. This one, mountains, a place to eat, and lots of books. What else do you need? I love this one. Very, had to have a waterfall. This girl loves her house. I like the hammock. I like one of those in my house too.
I like the bird.
Then you got the kids. This is getting up into grade 7 where, well, we have to have housing. We have to have a high school. There has to be all this. And it was really, and then I'm like, okay, we need to move on. And they just wanted to keep drawing. And then this one, I could probably do a whole PhD on this kid. I'll tell you a little bit. This is the forest of stability, and eventually you have to cross into the land of temptation where there's drugs, a casino, and a strip joint. But luckily every year the world resets itself and you go back to the forest of stability. Anyway, so the Little Prince, as the story goes, he moves from his little asteroid, E651, anyway, I can't remember, and no, 1215, no, I didn't forget. And he has to go through all these other asteroids, and he runs into people on each of the asteroids. So the king is on the first one, the businessman is on the second one, vain man, drunkard, lamplighter, and geographer. So I read all of these to the students. And, at the end, the prince leaves all of these planets. And I had this question. I thought it was so brilliant. I said, so, if they had a virtue to balance, what virtue would help them so the prince would actually want to stay around a little longer? And you're like, the king, he needs this, he needs a little bit of humility. And, so we would go through it. And I went with, how many groups? I had 10 groups. And I went through all of them up to about the 8th group. And this grade 8 girl says to me, Susan, why are you not asking us what virtues they already have? Fred Flintstone, right? But, so I did, and they started seeing the assertiveness of the king, the diligence of the businessman, the confidence of the vain man, the gentleness of the drunkard, the obedience of the lamplighter, and the loyalty. I think loyalty was a big one for him as well, and he trusted the geographer who never ever traveled on his own. So I was blown away, and I was so blown away that I went back to the earlier groups and said, so this grade 8 girl taught me that I forgot to ask an important question, and we all went through it again with the ones that we hadn't done that with. Oh, so, I wanted to do a surprise shoot. Anyway, so there's one point where the Little Prince comes across the railway switchman, and the people are on the train and they're going back and forth really fast, and the Little Prince is puzzled and he goes, where are they going? The switchman goes, nobody knows. And the children had their nose up against the glass and they're just looking out. So I said to the kids, I said, in all your wisdom, you know a lot of adults, right? You have aunts, uncles, teachers, parents. I want you to answer 2 questions for me today, because after I read that piece, what do you see most adults looking for? And what do you see most children? Wow. That's my world of their responses. So money, success. Guess what the kids was? Fun! Happiness! Friends!
I love it.
So I thought that was cool. So here's some of the individuals. So at grade 4, this was pretty common. They give me one with answers. Money, fun. Grade 5, good perfect place, adults. Children, something they can like and take in. Grade 6. I love this one. Most adults are looking for happiness, but they make their happiness so specific they never find it. Most children are happy with what they have. They don't have a certain happiness. They would be happy with what they have and are amazed at anything they see and don't understand, like nature. Grade 7. Always looking for something, money, work, love. Have nothing to look for, so they're happy. Grade 8, this girl was fascinating. Nothing. Adults see the world as it is, forced into a mold by society. They look for nothing. Everything for them has already been found. Adults can have their own personalities, goals, dreams, but did they not look for them? They were already found. Children look for everything, whether it has been found yet or not. Mundane objects like trees or dolls. Nothing has been found for them. They form their own personalities, dreams, goals, because society has not ready them yet. Those things stay within the adult.
This is amazing.
Okay, so the next one, I went too fast. So then the prince meets the fox and they have all kinds of conversations. I love that part of the book. They didn't do enough of it in the movie, but anyway. The fox says, what is essential is invisible to the eye. And then in the final chapter where the pilot is walking the prince towards a snake, it comes up several times. What is beautiful is invisible to the eye. What is essential? What is important? So I asked them what it is, and these were their biggest responses in the Wordle. So look at this, okay? Love, air. I had 2 distinct groups. I had some groups that were all about love, imagination, compassion, and others, air, oxygen. It was fascinating. And so the one who really was funny, and this is a diary entry, but there's this little guy. He was so perplexed when I answered the question. He was staring at the page, and this other kid in his group said, hey, Lance, she's got a cheat sheet up there. Just write down all the virtues. And Lance responds, but I can see the virtues. I see them in action. And I said, you know what? I see them even when they're not in action. I know and trust the air and invisible. And he didn't trust me. He wrote down air. But later in the day, my room every once in a while it erupts into chaos, and I have to kind of calm things down again. And I asked them for their self-discipline. I said, I can't see it, but I know it's there. And he just gave me a look like, I know what you're trying to do. So here are some of the standouts of what is.
You missed, go back to that. You missed this one.
No,
No, that was my I didn't know. So these were some of the other standouts. What is essential but invisible? Expectation, love, the virtues, ancestors that died, invisible angels, lies, the knowledge of there being something amazing somewhere, the subtle joy of learning, a place to be loyal to, string of events necessary to have you read this right now, a reason to do something, justice, mystery, perception. Wow. So I'm going to tell this really quick. I had one day that just imploded, so this I'll just tell the story because it'll be faster. And at the end of the day, 2 of the guys got into my computer and messed around with it, and I couldn't get it working, and I was just so pissed. And I said, okay, we're done, I'll see you tomorrow, because they happened to be coming in for 2 days. And I was just like, I was that annoyed. And I went home that night, I'm like, how do I bounce back from this? And because I have a sister who's absolutely amazing, I remembered when things go wrong, think of it as boundaries. What did you forget to set your boundaries? Do you have to remind them? So when they came in the next morning, I said to him, I went home pretty upset last night. And so the first thing I did was remembered the virtues in you that amaze me. And I picked them out of each of the boys. These are grade 8 boys. And I said, I am sorry, but I had trouble with giving clear boundaries, or I don't think we had clear boundaries yesterday. So I'm going to tell you what they are today. We had the most unbelievable day I have ever had with a group of kids in my entire life. And the thing was, they were writing a script for a DI presentation they were doing. And their whole script was about the importance of relationships, and this character keeps forgetting that. 3 of us, me and 2 of the boys, were in tears when they finished reading that script. We were just, and anyway. They're grade 9 now, and I won't see them. So, I was worried about the last chapter. The little prince gets bitten and goes off to the planet, and I'm thinking, can they handle it? Like Antoine said, they can, just read it. And so I read that chapter, and all I asked them was, why did the little prince return to his planet? And this is what they said. Well, he had to care for his flowers, Susan. One kid said, was that suicide? And then we had a discussion about death and loss, and it was amazing with all of the groups. So I asked them when we finished for 2 questions, or to answer 2 questions for me. First of all, forgot her. This was the grade 8 girl's response. The little prince went back to his planet because there was nothing worthwhile on ours. He had his flower and sunsets all to himself. On our planet, there were drunkards and people who hurt others simply because they can. Anyways, people like him couldn't survive on our planet. He's grown up and more mature, but still innocent. He hasn't yet been broken down by the terrible reality we live in. He would be better off on his planet, no deadlines and none that need him to grow up. He missed his planet because everything is so much easier there. I think everyone dreams of their own planet, and everyone deserves to go there. That's where everyone goes when they die, to their own place where there are no worries or hardship. The little prince just got to understand what this paradise is like and has a story to tell. So I had 2 questions. As we read the book, we have been working on all kinds of projects in the meantime. These were my questions. Some things I hope I will remember when I'm an adult, or things I wish the adults in my life would remember. Which virtues I will need to cultivate to become the adult I imagine, wish I would be. And how will I do this? And they struggled a lot with the how will I do this, but I'll show you what I got. I didn't know what to expect when I fit all their responses into a Wordle. Which virtues will I need to cultivate? Patience, responsibility, confidence, flexibility, creativity. The one that made me laugh, this is my little autistic grade 4 girl. I hope I remember mixing gum flavors and even bath products. She's so excited to share that with me. And then she was perplexed. She goes, Susan, I don't know which virtues I need. And I said, well, are there any adults that you really admire that you think have virtues that you think you would aspire to? Well, Susan, I really admire your friendliness. I'm going to write down friendliness. And then she began thinking of other people and got all of these. The one that made me cry was boy, grade 5. I really want to remember to spend lots of time having fun with my kids in periods of 2 hours. I know a lot of people, adults, who agree to have fun, but they leave in 5 minutes. Now, I imagine being a role model and generally a good dad that won't get divorced or anything. I need purposefulness to keep me going, and definitely creativity. There's no more creativity or curiosity that people need, and it will make me feel special instead. This one really made me think. This goes for both options. You or the other person's whatever age was what my age is. The virtues, every virtue, this grade 8 girl. As you're forced or not to become an adult, virtues cannot remain half-baked. Everyone has weaker and stronger ones. That fact will remain until we die. But I hope whatever childish fantasies are lodged in my head, that I can be a friend as well as a rule setter, have the open mind of a child while having the boundaries of an adult. This one made me sit up. When I'm an adult, I hope to remember how it is to be a kid. I wish the adults in my life would remember how a kid's mind works so they won't find me so confusing. But this one, joyfulness, responsibility, reliability, assertiveness, confidence, humility. I will do this by remembering others who had or didn't have these virtues and remembering their impressions on me or others. Does that not make you feel, I better watch what I'm doing? The kids are watching me. This one has me worried. If I had a student that disintegrated this year, this is, and I could tell you so many stories about him, but in the end, he sent me a note that said, from an idealistic geek to an idealistic nerd, have a good summer. And this is the one I won't forget, Jack. My time in the gifted program, what my hobbies were, who my friends were, the reason why I wanted to learn, why I cried. The virtues, peacefulness, understanding, tolerance, trust, caring, perseverance, and diligence. I put little brother hockey team because I have to tell you this story, and I want you to just see how I'm going. Shit. Okay. He read the book to his brother and took him to me. All right. So in the end, I told them, you are going to be amazing grown-ups. And one group of kids said, Susan, you are an amazing grown-up. And that was the honoring spirit. At the end of the year, we all kind of picked out the virtues that really stood out to me and each of the kids, and then they added to it. And they surprised me with this, which really was sweet. And made me feel really special. Now I'm bragging, so I'll move on. If you ask me whether I believe these interactions can or will have an impact on the inner milieu of a gifted child who may or may not experience a disintegration, my only response is maybe. To measure the impact of this lesson would take years, and even then it would be a guess at best. If I hearken back to the idea that education is not something one does to another, but rather a reciprocal relationship, I can guarantee you the impact was profound. But what is the value of this curriculum on individuals who may or may not ever experience a disintegration? This takes me to one of the biggest stumbling blocks I've had with the theory, the appearance of a hierarchy in the levels which Dabrowski may or may not have intended, as well as a reference to intelligence being the mitigating factor in one's ability to successfully or positively navigate a disintegration. And so I was fascinated when I read through the introduction to Personality Shaping Through Positive Disintegration, written by O. Hobart Maurer, who was undoubtedly a fan of Dabrowski, but who also regarded this as a serious flaw. Interestingly enough, Maurer's substantial legacy is in the approach used by Alcoholics Anonymous, where confessional meetings provide a community to support drug and alcohol rehabilitation. His attempts to create integrity groups with lifelong commitments to support other types of mental illness did not go as well, but in the introduction he addresses the difficulty which arises when one tries to distinguish between positive and negative conflict by suggesting we could make this theorizing unnecessary with a simpler hypothesis that conflict as such is neither positive or negative, but the reactions thereto necessarily are. And therefore, community was a key element in a positive or negative disintegration. So what is community in a theory in which autopsychotherapy is a major theme? The Virtues Project gives us a different way of understanding community, both in that the virtues themselves have emerged out of a global or evolutionary sense of community in terms of what we value, which are also well described by Dabrowski, but also in the fifth strategy of the Virtues Project, which is spiritual companioning. In his later work on authentic education, Dabrowski acknowledges this, so I'm going back to that, okay? He said, personal dignity towards others was the same attitude towards ourselves. To me, that's community. That's not just intelligence working on that positive disintegration. People often say that the language of the virtues are too complicated and difficult for children, that these concepts are too difficult and we must make things easier for them. My response to that comes from Saint-Exupéry, who also signals why this book was, which also signals why this book was a perfect companion for this journey. In his words, what afflicts young people is not a lack of capacity whatsoever. It's that they are forbidden on pain of appearing old-fashioned to draw strength from the great restoring myths of mankind. Ours is a decadent society that has declined from the level of Greek tragedy to the cliches escapist comedy. Ours is the age of publicity and the point system, of totalitarian governments and armies without flags or bugles or services for their dead. I hate my own period with all my heart. Today, man is dying of thirst, and he wrote this in the 1940s. So I had a big question for Paul. What are we thirsting for? I'm going to give you Dan Popov's response. The assumptions underlying character development. Each of us is here to thrive, not merely survive and fit in. Each of us is given a unique part to play in the ever-advancing divine plan. Each of us is born with all the virtues and our unique role concealed in our soul. Each of us will develop at our own pace and our own way. In everything there is a divine plan and the hand of others. Each will become who they are meant to be if the right conditions are present. And when I speak of divine plan, it's not a religious divine plan. It's like this absolutely amazing set of circumstances that has come together to allow us to be here right now. That's, to me, amazing. I would say that. The world does not need us to fix it. It needs us to love it so it can heal itself. The virtues show us how. We say so often, what the world needs is love, but we don't know how to do it. I think the virtues show us. And it says Sophie there because I have a little story to tell you about my youngest daughter. I'm reading this presentation to my husband in the van. She's got her headphones on, so I think she's not listening. And we get home and she's mad at me. And I said, honey, what's wrong? You love your students more than me. I said, what are you talking about? You were sure not with that. I said, I thought your headphones were on. I listen to everything. You love them more than me. And I said, but you'll understand when you're a parent, it's impossible to love your students more. You were saying all those great things about them, you don't say them about me. And I said, well, she said, I don't want you to love your students. And I said, why not? I want you to love me the most. I said, I do. And then I said to her, I said, do you know why I love my students? No. And I said, because one day one of them might be your husband too. And she said, I'm going to be a single mom and have a dog. So I said to her, but maybe one will be your doctor or your mechanic or someone else. And then I sang to her, I said, do you remember this song that I wrote when you guys were just little? And I sang to her, what do I do if I love you? I've got to love the world to make sure the world has all it needs to love my little girl. And she looked at me, and she gave me a hug, and she kissed me. And this morning before I left, she said, good luck, Mom. And I said, I'm going to tell them that story. And she started crying and gave me a kiss. So I want to end with that. And there are my sources. So we have 1 minute for questions. There are any.
I hope you'll be working on other curriculum or items for the curriculum for education for the next conference.
Well, I did one project with a teacher. She was doing a research project for her grade 3 kids.
Yeah.
And so we talked about the virtues that you would want a scientist who's doing investigation to happen. And she embedded that into each step that they were doing. So,
No, this is terrific. A practical, it's an example of a practical exercise to implement the general prescriptions given with identification.
I'll be giving the slides to Jill.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you go to the virtuesproject.org or .com, they have, the whole project is there with all kinds of links. Christine is a master facilitator, so she's teaching me how to use the virtues in my work. And there's all kinds of, I've been having people play with the virtues all weekend, reading them out, or reading about things. We've been having some fun with them. So it's amazing how they resonate with kids when you read it out. Like one of the kids, I said, I noticed your perceptiveness this year. And I read out that virtue, and all the kids at the table went, oh, that's what it is. They didn't have the word for it, but they saw it too. And when I read it out, they were just like, you got it, Susan, you nailed it. That's what I see in them. It was just like they know this stuff, and they have it. I fully believe that. Some it's harder to awaken, and I work really hard on that, helping them see that.